Hello, welcome to Dust Jackets, Conversation with Authors. We speak with authors across many genres about their books, their creative process, and how they manage it all. I'm Maggie Lynch, and today I'm interviewing David Starkey. Let me read his bio from his website. David Starkey served as Santa Barbara's 2009 to 2011 Poet Laureate. He is founding director of the creative writing program at Santa Barbara City College and the publisher and co-editor of Gunpowder Press. Over the past 30 years, he's published 11 full-length collections of poetry with small presses and more than 500 poems in literary journals such as American Scholar, Georgia Review, Prairie Schooner, and Southern Review. As an educator, he's written and edited a number of books, most recently Hello Writer and Creative Writing, Four Genres in Brief, the fourth edition. Both are published by Bedford St. Martin's in 2021. David is also a founding editor of the California Review of Books and the host of Santa Barbara's Creative Community. He's a very busy guy. David, welcome to the podcast.
No, thank you for having me, Meg. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for making the time for us. So that's quite a bio. I'd have to say I'm impressed, particularly with your poetry collections and the number of publications in literary journals. I've met a lot of poets in my life, but none have as many publications as you do. Would it be correct to assume that poetry is your primary genre?
Yeah, I think that's true most of the time. I feel like when get off on another project that I'm that other kind of writer. So, for instance, I just finished writing a book about Bruce Springsteen. So, for about 5 months, I was a music journalist primarily. And I have a novel that's just come out, and so for the months that it took me to write that, I was a novelist. But I think, yeah, my default setting as a writer is probably as a poet.
Well, so I'm going to ask you, recently some of my folks, my fans who watch this show, have asked me to ask more questions around what type of reading has influenced you in the past. So, can you tell me, is there a particular book or couple of books that stick in your mind that may have influenced you as a child, as an adult? And do they have any relationship at all to what you write today?
Yeah, I think as an adult, the group of books that's most interested or most influenced me is probably the collected poems of Seamus Heaney. And by collected, I mean it's a little set of 11, 12, 13 books. Um, I was lucky enough, as several Santa Barbara Poet Laureates and I went to Ireland a few years back, and we were lucky enough to read at the Seamus Heaney Center in Bellaghy, Northern Ireland. And on the shelf in their gift shop was this book, this little collection. And I had read Heaney, but I hadn't devoured him in that way. So that was, I don't know, maybe that was about eight years ago. That really, I think, influenced my poetry a lot in the time since then. As a child, I was kind of a whoever or whatever was available. So I spent my summers. My parents were public school teachers in Sacramento, California, but their parents lived in Beaumont, Texas, and Lake Charles, Louisiana, and we would go back there for most of the summer, every summer from the time I was a little child till the time I graduated from high school, and whatever happened to be on the shelves of my grandparents. So it could be James Bond or,
Mhm.
uh, I read Endymion, Keats's long poem, struggled through that. I read Thomas Mann's The Magic Mountain, which is something that most
Oh,
14-year-old boys don't read.
yeah.
Um, so, whatever I could kind of get my hands on, because reading was the only thing when I was growing up outside of my regular school life. I read what I
Mm.
could.
Well, those certainly are pretty big tomes to be reading as a child or a
Right,
teenager. So I can kind of see how that would influence you, especially with the poetry, the language and the rhythms, and
right.
I imagine are very great. I didn't read poetry much as a child. As a teenager, I did because they were very, deep to me. But as a child, I wasn't really into that. So right now, things that are contemporary things, is there anything that a particular author or poet that you're always looking for their next work? Or are you just kind of whatever you feel like is what you're going to pick up tomorrow
Well, so
or the next day?
with my friend Brian Tanguy, I'm the co-editor of the California Review of Books, as you mentioned, and so we'll get a lot of different things. So, um, most recently, over the last week, I reviewed a biography of John Prine, the great
Mm, yeah.
singer-songwriter, and I reviewed a biography of Christopher Marlowe, the Elizabethan dramatist.
Mm,
And then I also reviewed a book of interviews with New York school poets like John Ashbery and Kenneth Koch and people like that. Um, so I don't know. I whatever lands on my desk that looks interesting to me, I'll sit down and read it and probably give it a review.
yeah. I had forgotten already that you were a reviewer, so you are reading a lot.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And I when I was younger, when I started a book, I was committed to it. I think that's how I was able to read those books when I was a youth. But now, as a reviewer, and I have stacks and stacks of books, if I'm not into it by the first 20 or 30 or 40 pages, then um, off to Planned Parenthood book sell it goes.
Oh, okay. Well, that's something for
Good
people
cause.
to understand, yeah. And I think the same thing works if you're trying to get traditional contracts. The people who are reading your book from the slush pile, it's kind of like you better catch me pretty
Yeah,
quickly, within 50 pages, I would say. So,
yeah. Well, and I think it's interesting, since we're both also writers, how do you get those reviews? I think, you can get a review on social media from a friend or a book influencer that you pay, but it's hard to get a serious reviewer to look at a book of serious writing. Um,
mhm.
and so, you know, we reviewers get pitched all the time by people, by agents, by the marketing folks at the big publishers, by the writers themselves, and it's hit and miss. You never know when that one idea is really going to resonate with a reviewer, just as you don't know when it's going to resonate with an editor or an agent.
Right, exactly. And the reviews that you're doing, I know so many review places now charge money.
Right,
Sometimes as little as $50 and sometimes as much as 500 and something like
right.
Kirkus. So where you review, is that a charge thing or?
Absolutely not. No, in fact, I just was having a beer with my co-editor a couple days ago, and we were talking about what horrible business people we were. Because all we get out of it is free books, which any reviewer gets. But it also gives us a lot of power because you're not paying us $500 to review your book. We wouldn't take it, and so therefore we don't have to. If we don't like your book, not going to review it. And I think we're probably a kind of a getting to be a pretty a rare bird right now, in that we just are looking for what we think are the best books that we want to pass on to our readers, the readers of California Review of Books.
Yeah. About the only other place I can think of is Midwest Book Reviews. You can still get a free review, but if you pay them the $50, you're guaranteed to get one.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it could be 2 years later before they
Yeah.
get to you. So,
Well, and even I think even when you're paying, uh, I think like with Kirkus, as you mentioned, it's really expensive. But if they are true to their word, that doesn't guarantee you a good review. You could get a
It's true.
lousy review, and then I think you have the option of not publishing it. But you're I think if you're paying $500 and you know you're going to get a great review, that seems pretty sleazy to me.
Yeah, no, I think Kirkus is true to their word.
Yeah,
I've seen some bad reviews, or what I would consider bad, because they're like 3 out of 5.
right, right.
And which after you've paid 500 and some dollars, that's not what you wanted to hear.
Is that what you want to hear?
So, because you are both a novelist and a nonfiction person and a poet, I wonder, did you set out to be a specific type of writer and then branch out to novels and nonfictions like a poet?
Yeah.
Or did it just kind of happen based on whatever was influencing you?
Well, when I like I was saying, I read a lot as a kid, and I think that sort of makes you want to be a writer because you admire the people who are producing the books that you're reading. And so my grandfather had given me an old Smith Corona typewriter, and when I was in high school, I just started typing on it, and the things that mostly came out were little short stories. And
Mm.
so that was when I went to UC Davis, I was an English major with a creative writing emphasis, and it was fiction was my emphasis there.
Mm.
And then I somehow wound up with at UCLA getting a master's degree in literature, and uh, my roommate encouraged me to write poetry. I somehow I wrote a poem about Danny Bonaducci of the Partridge Family with the line, "Did you ever learn to play that bass guitar?" And my friend thought that was hilarious, and
Mm.
he said you should write some more poems. So, um, I think that's kind of been my way of writing is that I have a dark humor kind of running through everything, but there's also a sense of sadness and loss. Even in a subject matter like that, it's this child actor who was a phony even as he was pretending to be something else. And so I think that's that you see that if you were to read across my pretty broad,
Mm.
body of work.
Is that kind of a calling card for you that even if it's dark or sad that you have balance it with some humor?
I think so, and vice versa too. Even something that if something seems purely silly, I probably would avoid it. But if there's some humor lined with sadness, then that would probably, my radar would be that sounds interesting.
I think it takes a talented person to do both of those things well. So
Yeah, no.
that's so one of the other things my listeners really love to hear about is your creative process, your inspirations, like, where do you write? Is there just one spot or is it wherever you are? And do you continuously work on one project at a time or do you go back and forth between multiple projects?
Yeah, I like to kind of right around until I zero in on something that I really want to do. So that's what makes poetry so great is it doesn't t take that long to write the draft of a short lyric poem. Um, but I will start to think, okay, this is what I'm working on now. And then when I do that, then I tend to just push everything aside. Um, and you can ask my wife in the other room, like everything. I get kind of obsessed with the work until I finish it. Um,
Um,
so yeah, I work at my computer. I do take notes in a little notebook, especially when I'm out and about traveling, or when I know that I'm going to write about something. I do try and take handwritten notes, but mostly I write in silence. In my study, a little corner of the room, and that's where most of it happens.
and did you say, do you write primarily in a notebook or on your computer, on a
Yeah, only
typewriter?
taking notes. I only take notes by hand. My handwriting is pretty bad, so frequently I can't read my own my own notes. So that I have to make stuff up, because it would be a bad reporter.
Doctor handwriting is what I
Dr.
call
Handwriting, yeah.
it. Well, I hear you about obsessiveness. I can get that way myself, particularly when I'm past the halfway part.
Right.
My husband will peek his head in and say, "Are you eating?" No, not right now. No.
Yeah.
So it's like, see you tomorrow morning.
Right. No, you're right. And I think that's something about that halfway point where you can say, I'm on the downhill slope, and I got to keep going.
Right. Yeah. I don't want to lose it. That's kind of the way that I feel. Um, so both of your novels are about musicians, and though it appears that they're very different in terms of the themes and the genre. And you also have a nonfiction book about a musician group. So my first question is, are you a musician yourself? And what interests you about creating music and sharing peeks into the lives of musicians?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I've been playing in bands since I was in high school, and I still play in a couple bands now at age 63. So I've put in plenty of decades of work doing that. I mean, I think that the creative process of making music, writing songs, popular songs, is not unlike, what we do when we're writing a novel or writing poems or essays. Um, but when you're working with other people, there's just that dynamic of competition and collaboration, and I think the way in most bands those two things are always kind of in a tension, that makes for a dramatic situation. So, yeah, I wrote a book about the Talking Heads, and there was a ton of conflict there because David Byrne was writing nearly all the music and the lyrics, but the rest of the band wanted to have credit, and so they were kind of always just, uh, you know, on edge. So I've just finished this book about Bruce Springsteen. And, he calls himself the boss for a reason.
Yeah.
He calls all the shots. So there's less tension, although clearly, people have been kind of hurt and dissatisfied along the way as he's sort of, moved in his own directions.
Yeah. So it sounds like whether you're writing fiction or nonfiction, that you're also doing a lot of research.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, the two novels I've written, one of them is about a band, a kind of pretty famous band that crashes into someone's backyard, and that backyard just happens to look exactly like my backyard. So that made it really easy to write because I could imagine, where the plane was and what the people were doing, and then I have a bunch of fans kind of swarming over the place over the course of a couple months because they want to commemorate the band. And then my second novel is about these two kind of washed up folk rock musicians who tour Japan because one of their songs becomes a part of a commercial for a Honda commercial. Um, and that is based on my own travels in Japan. My son lives there, and I've visited, I guess, 8 or 9 times over the last 10 years. So I
Mm.
have a pretty good sense of that, at least enough to write a novel where two, Americans are wandering around the country.
I can't even imagine how crazy that is,
Yeah,
because it's such and my experience of it is that it's such a homogenous culture with, really kind of well set ideas about how you interact with people, and Americans tend to be kind of all over the place, and
yeah.
definitely feeling that they're the superior
Right. But
set.
it's also a culture that embraces idiosyncrasies. So, there's a cult for just about everything. I mean, use the word cult loosely, but the people who dress up like Elvis and dance in the streets of Tokyo or whatever genre of music. So the first rock band in Japan that sang in Japanese was actually a folk rock band. Um, so that was a nice little piece of information I dug up along the way. But yeah, and so it's just a fish out of water story, which is those are one of my favorite types of stories, is to see people kind of trying to navigate a world that they're not super familiar with.
Oh, I agree. I love fish out of water. I think a lot of authors do because that's how they feel themselves from the world.
You're right. Yeah.
Um, so many writers, even if they're writing cross genres, or what appears to be very different genre types of books, they tend to have at some point kind of an overriding theme that becomes a part of every book, whether they planned it that way or not. Is that the case with you, or do you work completely unique? No crossovers.
No, I think there's crossovers. I mean, I think I've always been interested in what it's like when people are close to death, and my own parents both passed away in the last few years, and that just being there, when my dad was taking his last breath, um, I think there's something really powerful about that, and so I think even when I was in my 20s, I was writing about people who were dying or had died, and um, but I think I was often looking at it kind of at a canted angle, maybe a little bit of that dark humor that we were talking about
Mhm.
earlier, um, and that's probably still in there somewhere. I'm not somebody who's only writing about death, but there in both my novels there is a significant death, in each one.
Mm.
So I guess that is something that's carries over.
It's creeping in there no matter
Yeah,
what.
no matter what we do, Maggie.
Exactly. Yes. People think that we have control. The answer is no, we really don't. Um, so you were saying, because you had two novels, and the one about Japan is the most recent one. Is that correct?
Just out this month, yeah.
Okay. And are all your books in paperback, hardback, ebook, audiobook,
Yeah, I
film?
mean, most of my, I would say the definitely the novels and the nonfiction I've written is available, as a ebook and paper copies, hardback and
Mm,
paperback. The the books of poetry are generally just a paperback, that
mm,
they're not usually in a digital form. I am going to do the recording for my two novels. I got the go ahead to do that. So I just need to find a quiet place in the house to sit down and
mhm.
read through everything. But I'm looking forward to that. I think a lot of people do listen to audiobooks now that don't read paper, or even digital books. So I'm looking forward to having that in my arsenal.
Well, I'm really happy you're reading your your books yourself, just because I think that a lot of listeners love hearing the author read, unless, of course, they're really lousy at it.
They're a lousy reader, yeah.
I can't imagine that you are just in talking to you, but I think they like it because they figure that the author knows where to put the emphasis,
Right, right.
and the author knows what the rhythm was, whether it's a poem or a line of description, and it's just so much more rich that way when
Mhm.
they listen. So I wish you the very best. That is
Thank you.
a onerous process.
Yeah, yeah, it is. I mean,
You know.
I wish Brad Pitt was going to be doing the reading instead, but we couldn't
Yes.
get him.
Yeah, it can be. I have not narrated anything myself. I keep telling myself I'm going to, but it's hard to find the time. You're
Right,
talking sometimes 10, 15
for
hours.
sure. Yeah, yeah.
And so but I wish you the very best for
Thank
that.
you. I appreciate that.
Uh, So, what are you working on next? I know you have something just out, but do you have another project you're planning to get into soon?
Yeah, so I actually had finished just before I wrote that Bruce Springsteen book. I had been working on a novel where Elvis Presley is elected president in 1968, and Robert Kennedy Sr. is not assassinated, and he becomes Elvis's vice president. And then Elvis turns out to be a really horrible president. So the first part of the book is getting Elvis elected, and then the first part is Elvis kind of destroying America, and then
Oh my.
and I don't know if it sounds familiar or not, but um, and then yeah, and then I have a kind of surprise ending.
Wow. That's I want to read that.
Yeah, yeah, I'll definitely
Sure,
send you a copy.
because that's so unique, and I can see how it might have some parallels
Yeah.
in our political situation. Just because when people are living in an environment where everyone's waiting on them and listening to them and doing whatever they say, sometimes they don't have the practice at being
Right, right. Well, and I
empathetic
think,
to other
yeah.
situations.
And Elvis was used to getting his own way. I mean, in my novel, Sam Phillips, you know, his manager who took 50% of everything that he earned,
Mm.
um, is pushed out of the way pretty early in the novel, so that Elvis suddenly has this power that he's never had before, and it turns out that he's not great at handling it.
Yeah, wow. I and I'm sure there's gonna be humor as well
Oh
as
yeah,
death.
yeah. Dark humor. Yeah.
Oh, that's just amazing. So, where can people find your books? Is it just at your publisher, or are they distributed widely?
No, I mean, you know, they're wherever you buy books, I think kind of around the world. I think my publishers have been pretty good about making sure that's not just on Amazon, you know, that
Good.
wherever you buy books. So, yeah, you know, occasionally I'll toss up in a local bookstore, but I mostly I think people buy my work online
Yeah, I think that's true pretty much.
for most of it.
But but speaking of tossing up in a bookstore or somewhere
Yeah.
else, are there any events or places you plan to be, let's say over the next couple months, should people listening to this say, hey, like,
Yeah.
if you said San Francisco, for example, people who are from there might want
Right,
to
right.
show up.
Well, if people are in the central coast of California, I'll be launching my book at Chaucer's Bookstore on September the 28th at 3 p.m. That's a Sunday. And there's one of the finest local bookstores, certainly in California, probably in the country. It's a magnificent place. I'm really excited about
Wow.
that. And then I will be at the Louisiana Book Festival on the 1st of November, along with a lot of other writers. And I'm still kind of just, you know, looking around for places. So if somebody watches or listens to your podcast and says, "Oh, I want David Starkey," then just head on over to my website, davidstarkey.net, and shoot me a line, and I'll be there.
Oh, that's great. Well, maybe someone from Japan will say that.
That's right. Yeah.
And just to remind my listeners, I always put in the show notes your website information and contact information and anything like that. So they'll know how to get to your
All
website. I know
right. Great.
sometimes spelling becomes a problem with with different names. So well, I really thank you for being my guest today, David. And reminder to all my listeners is, share this podcast with other people you think would be interested. It sounds like David is the kind of author that has both some deep things happening, but also humor. And I know a lot of you asked for humor, so this is your chance to read someone. Uh, and check the show notes to be sure that you can contact him if you want to, or just check out his website because he has a whole lot of other books besides the ones that we've been discussing. So this has been Dust Jackets, Conversation with Authors. Our guest today was David Starkey. You can get more Dust Jacket author interviews on your favorite podcast app. Please check back on past interviews and stay tuned for new ones. Thank you.